don't we get started just to be right on time? Thank you, everybody, for joining. We may have a couple more join. And we have been doing these monthly webinars to talk about different things that we know from research in neuropsychology that are applied and that we can use right away in terms of work with ourselves, our teams, et cetera. And in the last 6 months, I've personally gotten more and more interested in this idea about how we really think about loss aversion, around acquiring things, around letting go of things, and how the deck is really stacked against us as humans for this. And we'll talk about this as we get to specific slides. And you all know this kind of naturally. You may have heard that our tendency is to really hate having anything that we lose. It's called loss aversion. And when they do experiments saying, would you do whatever, gamble or bet some game you're playing, you have the chance of winning $100 or losing $100. People will not play unless they're going to win $200 versus losing $100. It's about a 2-to-1 ratio. And you could say, well, that's just crazy psychology, gambling, whatever, research. But it has huge pertinence to how our lives end up being set up. And one of them is that we just are very wired to keep taking things on. And here's the second kind of insidious thing that happens. We habituate to what we have in our life quickly, and that just means get used to it very quickly. And you all also would know this, even from really good things, from when we get our first job, or you get a promotion, or you have a new partner, or you move, or fill in anything that's exciting. After a while, people tend to kind of get used to it, and it fades into the background. So this combo of us being very wired and having difficulty letting go of things and losing things, and quickly kind of tuning out the good aspects of our life and not noticing them all the time, leads us onto this treadmill of acquiring more. And from this, Sam, you can start the PowerPoint. We got interested in this idea of the stop list, and you can go to the next one. So, we talk a lot at the turn of the year about what are we all going to do for resolutions. And most typically those are about starting a new habit, picking up something different we're going to often do, or take on or add to our diet, or so on and so forth. And I really am interested in the idea of using landmarks, whether it's the new year or using months turning, to think about what we're going to stop doing, because that piece is not natural. And if we look at the state of today, and this is research, the bottom one is some polling done by Gallup, but it's endemic if you look at research on how people are doing, particularly parents with kids schooling at home. The majority of people are talking about feeling harried, overburdened, that it's really tough with this boundary with work. I know this piece isn't new to you. I had a client say to me, it's not really like working from home. It's like I live at work. And that's really an interesting twist with it, to think about we don't have the natural boundaries, more is coming our way, and we make a mistake, and I really believe this is a mistake, of saying, how do I manage my time better? Wrong currency in my mind. Of course, we need to be on top of our schedule, but that implies everything I'm doing, I should be doing. And I think that is a complete fallacy for most of us. 67 over 2/3 of us feel sometimes or always burned out. And this has aggregated, work life, home life, all sorts of responsibilities. So Sam, if you can go to the next one, and if people, please turn your microphones on. I would love anyone who's willing to share. This is confidential. This is us talking. How manageable do you feel your current life is? Or if it's easier to go back pre-pandemic when you were juggling outside things, mention that. How manageable does life feel at the moment?
Well, I can start.
Thank you, Takana.
Right now, my life is I have a lot going on. So, I mean, I was chatting with Sarah before the session started. I started a new job remotely in a different state this week. I am moving from the Twin Cities, so I just recently sold my house, bought another house in a different state, and I also start teaching in the evenings for the
Oh,
U of M next week in the evening. So I have a lot going on, and some days I don't know what direction I'm going in, and I just
yeah.
tell myself one day at a time. I'll just take one day at a time and go through my checklist and try to stay sane.
Which is a great way when we're overwhelmed to zoom in and get to right here. And you'll hear as we talk about this, priming ourselves with what is most important right now. We can say this in a moment, in a meeting, at the start of a day, at the start of a week. So you're naturally kind of shifting in, which is good. Anyone else on how manageable life is feeling? No, right or wrong. Go ahead and go to the next one, Sam, and we will keep having pauses to chime in. So I started talking about this, just entering it, but I really want this to sink in for you, for your employees, for your kids, for your family, that the natural state we end up in because of our neuropsychology is with too much stuff. And stuff can be people, tasks, responsibilities, belongings, commitments. The constant acquisition of things is easy to do. We have no natural resistance. In fact, we get a little dopamine hit off. And if we buy something, and we'll get down to this, say yes to someone for something, take things on, opposite of how we feel when we are letting things go. We talked about we quickly get used to things that are good. So it's really terrific to do gratitude lists. There's lots of positive research about that making us feel good. But if you want to really appreciate, if you feel like rotely you're saying, I'm so thankful I have my food because maybe you volunteered with the homeless, try fasting for a day. The best way we can see what we really have that we've habituated to or gotten used to is leveraging loss aversion. And by that, I mean, take it away. When things are taken away, we feel it, we see it, we miss it, we react to it. So, on the one hand, loss aversion makes it hard to naturally weed out stuff that's not critical, but we can also use it to appreciate things more. And I would argue that's why every major religion has days of fasting, days that we are stepping back from the hubbub of life. I mean, there's a lot of wisdom built up over generations that taking that step back. We do have loss aversion, which is to people, things, activities. And here's the crazy part, even when we didn't particularly like or value that thing, it is called psychological reactance. And it is wired into humans when something is taken away from us that we didn't make a choice about, we have a reflexive desire to have it back. We also have a built-in desire, and this is not a pathology, though, can get us into trouble, to please other people. We get feel-good hormones when we say yes, or someone says, can you help with this committee that's meeting 3 times a week for a year? And many of us just impulsively say yes. It feels good to say yes. And then need to kind of deal with that afterwards. We often forget choice. And when I will talk to clients about what's driving choice, it's interesting to me how often it's external factors. Well, if I'm asked for this, or I get an email, or X, Y, and Z, forgetting that we can also take time to really figure out what are the most important things for us to be doing. And I get sometimes, especially in corporate life or whatever, it may be hard to say no. But there's a huge waterfront of activities, areas, people, things that we can say no to, and we forget we have a choice in that. And then the last thing that's working against us was stopping things. It's something called sunk cost. And you've all seen this in different ways. It plays out in relationships that end up not being good. It plays out in projects at work that are floundering, but we've put a lot of money into them. So let's just invest one more time, because then somehow, we'll save what's already been put in. Or a relationship that's terrible. I feel like I need to keep trying because I've invested all of that. Kind of forgetting that the investment's the investment. And if current state, I'm looking at a project or a relationship and it doesn't make sense, all the sunk cost in the world doesn't make it a better prospect. So there's a number of things that are kind of working against us, invisible things, to get us to keep acquiring, saying yes, and not weeding out things, which is a huge aspect of how we end up overloaded. Sam, do you want to go to the next one? So I'm curious if anyone, you heard different, and it's not an exhaustive list of triggers, if you've experienced any of these, of having a hard time because it feels good to say yes, because it's reflexive, because you feel like you've already invested in this thing, because you want to please people around you. Any of those resonating?
Oh, yes.
Who said, oh, yes?
Jenna, the one who the Bridges team knows super well because I work with them and I reflexively say yes to dang near everything.
I get it. It can also, and I'm thinking of you, Jenna, it can also be being excited with opportunities. So again, I don't want to put a valence on this that there's some terrible aspect of this. It's just watching ourselves. It's almost as if we're border collies in our own lives and just a ball is thrown and we got to go. And we'll run and run and run until overloaded.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Oh, sorry. I'm grateful for such a good team because we all know each other very well. It kind of comes with the territory of being in this world. But yeah, so my team is always checking me saying, are you sure? And it's like, that's usually my inkling to be like, wait, am I sure? I mean, I just said yes. So, yeah. So, I mean, they all keep me in line. So I'm lucky for that.
That is good. Anybody else? Have you found yourself saying yes? Oh, go ahead, Anna.
I have one comment. I was just thinking about that. During lunchtime, I took advantage of that and went for a walk just to get moving. And I was thinking how difficult it is to include good things, good habits, because we don't want to let go of the bad ones. So when we say we don't have time for exercising, it's probably because we don't want to let go the time we spend on social media, internet, or TV, right?
Yeah.
So it's, yeah.
It's really true. And there's an interesting forcing function if we're putting in time because we consider that so critical to walk, or I'll give an example later about think time. And that just is non-negotiable. We're not scheduling over that and use it. We find that stuff fits in around it, but often we get it kind of backwards. We want to fit in the big stuff second, in little stray scraps of time, often not ideal time, like we're exhausted and it's 8 o'clock at night and it looks a little better to watch Netflix. Let's go to our next one. So why it matters. So the 80-20 rule is also called Pareto's rule, and coming from a person who discovered long ago that almost in any quadrant of your life, whether it's in science, whether it's if you look at athletics, you look at the top coders at Google, it tends to break out in an 80-20 rule that 20% of the people or events or whatever the metric is are doing 80% of the results. And a similar thing happens in our life or how we're rated with our jobs, et cetera, that it's a minority of things that are driving most of the results. Another example was Google was assessing what is the difference between someone who's a really good coder and a spectacular coder. And they thought maybe double. Nope, maybe 10 times better. Nope, maybe 1,000 times better. Nope, 10,000 times better. So the disparities, not only in when we have certain people that are exceptional, and we all know this if we, simple example is have great salespeople in a company. It's not just a little better, it may be like 10 people. And in our own lives, if we look carefully, let's use the work example. How am I truly evaluated for a home run? There's all sorts of things we could look at, but we all know at the bottom line, a couple of things are really what we're keeping our eye on. Are the majority of my activities and hours, 80%, aligning with that? People who get good at doing this have those spectacular results. And of course, part of that is serious stopping with other things. If we don't really look at doing this carefully, I believe a lot of the stress and depression that's going on is one of the results. Of course, things like isolation and people in the very current tense worried about pandemic, that is a big piece. But the bigger thing I see preceding pandemic and occurring in pandemic is just the volume of things going on in people's lives, many of which are not critical. Not critical. I mean, it might feel good to say yes to this, and a coworker might be happy with you for a minute if you said yes. But in terms of juggling it, it's just too much. And the first thing to go, of course, are things like health and relationships and personal time that's restorative, whether it's meditating, prayer, hobbies. And of course, those are also the things that keep us feeling good. So I'd love to get us out of thinking about how do I manage my time better, saying the list is the list, I need to fit everything in better, and get much more discerning about, do I even think this is the right list? Is this the right list? It matters a lot. One of the main places I've seen it with clients is they start seeing, for instance, their family says they're happier and they're doing it at work, which is kind of interesting. Let's go to our next slide. Does anyone want to comment on overload, what you've seen during the pandemic? Takana, thank you for your example. Any part of your life not getting as much attention in terms of health, well-being, however you define spirituality, hobbies, some of the pieces, social time?
I think one
Okay,
person,
go
I
ahead.
think one person might have said it, but just like the blurring of the lines between work and home, and so the absence of a commute.
Yes.
While commutes are bad, it also give you a detox or decompression or whatever you do in the 20x minutes you're in the car, and so sometimes that that window to reset, causes the the bleeding over, which has, it's not good for either yourself or others. So
That is a great, I've had more people say, I can't believe I'm missing the commute. But if we think about it, unless we're on the phone the whole time, it's a little buffer zone where no one's talking to me, no requests. Hopefully I'm not on email while I'm driving, but it's just a time to kind of transition. And a few of the people I work with have started building in a little buffer. I think the mistake we make, we need to stop working right up, dinner's at 6 and I'm working till 5:59. And then I expect I'm just going to emotionally transition right off a call. But finding a little time, sometimes it's taking a little time to reflect or organize, allowing that last 15 minutes can really make the transition different. Let's go to our next one. So I think if I were to do anything that would be helpful, it would be to crawl into your head and help change a mindset piece. And it is from saying everything's necessary. I treat all requests, including opening my email at 5:30 in the morning, and whatever comes in gets my attention first. Everything matters, and I'm going to fit it all in and be a good time manager. To stepping back outside of that email in front of you on the phone and saying there's a critical few things that at the bottom line in anything from relationships to work to help to so on and so forth really drive the majority of the results. And when I come to choices, it's not saying I'll do both. It's saying which trade-off would I rather make? Which trade-off would I rather make? Because we when we get good at being discerning, there's always a trade-off. And to make those explicit, wow, I'm going to work 3 more hours tonight on this. I'll catch up with my family tomorrow night. But it's saying, here's the trade-off. 3 hours with my kids to hang out and catch up on the day, as a simple example. Or 3 more hours working on XYZ. Sometimes the trade-off will be work if there's some critical thing, but the pieces we often do that reflexively without making a choice. So there are a few critical things and really getting clear, and it can be a great conversation with whomever you talk to. I mean, often at work, there's a big revenue piece. That's just a fact, unless you're a even nonprofits, of course, that's a fact too. Because at the bottom line, even doing good things and helping with things, we need to be supporting the business so it keeps growing. Let's go to our next one. So, kind of how do you do this? How do you think about changing your mindset? And I see it's kind of like, how do people get happier? It's not going at it directly, it's building habits. I mean, if you took one thing away to how do I shift from I'm going to jam it in to I'm going to be able to give myself the grace to stop some things and focus where I need to. It's designating a time, and it's different at the start of the day, week, month, and year. So at the start of the day, there is absolutely research from neuropsychology that when we prime ourselves with what's important, we see it, we notice things attached to it. I've talked about this in other NeuroLabs that we've had. Let me give you a simple, crazy example of how priming, even when we're not doing it personally. So someone had the great idea, we're going to go into a wine store and see if there's any bearing that happens when we play either German music or French music on the kind of wine people buy. And it went up by 2/3, depending on the kind of music that was being played. German music, German wine. And when they talked to people later, why did you choose whatever you chose? No idea. No idea. So external things priming us make a big difference. Our own priming ourselves, and it can literally be a minute, whether it's looking at my calendar, whether it's taking a moment in meditation to say, what is most important today? We can do this for a week. What do we need to get accomplished? We tend to grossly overestimate what we can do in a day or a week, and grossly underestimate what we can do in a year. So to be always also having that longer range view, what's important this week? Doesn't have to happen today, but critical things this month. How can I think about my big goals? And then of course in the year. And then training ourselves, particularly when incoming requests come, and this is so hard. I have to work on this every day. I think most of us do, to pause before we give an answer, whether it's email, live, on the phone, because the social pressure and that little dopamine hit of saying yes is so high and so easy to jump into versus saying no, and we get a little bad feeling. Some of us get anxious. but to pause and say, does this reflect my most important areas? Sometimes you may choose to do it because one of my areas, like for Takana starting a new job, is to build peer relationships. So I may do something extra in that vein. But if it's not tied to it and it's just someone's asking and I like to help, which a lot of us do, it's pausing and making a choice. What is the trade-off I'm making? If I get locked into this committee for 3 hours a month, what's the opportunity cost? What else could I be doing with that 3 hours? So remembering choice with that. Let's go to our next one. So the stop list. This is my wish for everybody for New Year's starting or any month turning over, is to really get serious, and you can start small with your stop list. And we can choose one area of our life. If you want to see how hard this is, at least for a lot of people, it could be going through a room in your house, whether you're someone who loves to fix it things, sort out all your materials and get rid of a bunch you don't use, or your closet. Say, I'm going to really weed out half the stuff. If you want to see loss aversion in action, watch yourself doing this. And one thing I'll tell you as a hint, it's much harder, whether it's a closet or your workbench or anything, to stand there and say, what am I going to get rid of? You will feel that loss aversion kick in. You'll start thinking about what this ties to or when you used it. If instead we take everything out, totally clean that bench, empty that closet, and say, I'm going to argue in things using the closet that I wear regularly, that I feel good in, look good on me, favorite colors, whatever your criteria is. And the rest of the things I'm not going to argue in, because life is easier when it's simpler. You may have heard, and this is cute or annoying, depending on your view of the tech industry, but many of them, Mark Zuckerberg, I think Obama did this too, but will choose the same color t-shirt and suit because choice overload's a real thing. And when we have less, it's like the 80-20, when we're stopping some of that extraneous stuff, including silly choices in our closet or weeding through our workbench for something, we tend to be more effective. So choose one area, ask what's most critical. You could do it on your calendar for a week. Ask if I love this or if it's work related. Is this something central to what I need to be doing? Part of the 80%. And then as things come up or I continue to do things, why am I doing it? Why am I buying it? Why am I relating to it? There can be some interesting answers that come out. I'm curious if anyone has had experience with trying, I bet, Takana, not to pick on you, but moving. If anyone wants to test your marriage and see your own loss aversion in action, how much stuff you realize most people have. Has anyone had the experience of trying to sort stuff out and kind of seeing how much you have, whether it's things or activities?
Yes.
I'm trying to do some of that decluttering as a part of a New Year's resolution, and it is tough.
It's really tough.
It's tough unless you have a motivation. So every year, my goal was to declutter my walk-in closet. And I would think about it and it would just I would feel overwhelmed because there's so much stuff there.
Yeah.
And when I put my house on the market and I had no choice but to declutter within probably 48 hours, my closet's beautiful. And I can't believe that I did it in such a short time frame. But I had a goal and I didn't think really hard about stuff that I needed to get rid of. I just did it. And after I cleaned it out and I organized it, I thought, why didn't I do this before? Why have I been putting this off for years? And it literally took me like a day, maybe a day and a half to do it.
Well, you put it off for years because you have a brain like the rest of ours that doesn't like to get rid of things we have. I mean, it's even as a psychologist who understands and is trained in neuropsychology, I watch myself and it's bizarre. Oh, I kind of like that sweater. I wore it on this event. And I'm thinking, I haven't worn it in 2 years. Why in the world am I hanging on to this?
Right.
So what is interesting is it is a skill, and whether you're doing it in your personal life, professional life, you will get better at it, as is saying no gracefully to things. You will get better. And I had a client who just did this recently. She was taking on everybody. She's a consultant. I'll help everybody on the team. And it's just unbelievable how she was working. And she said no, she was asked to join a Christmas Eve project. And she said no to it. She wasn't going to work over Christmas on this other person's project, and had such delight when she actually did that, because you become aware of that counter metric, the thing that you're saying yes to. And as hard as it is, especially for anyone from Minnesota to say no, we like to please people. We do get better at it, and it's, and we start to realize the things we're saying yes to. So let's go to our next one. I am curious, and you just to have you write down for yourself, and you can share this after or not, to think about relationships, think about work-related tasks you take on in addition to core things. Think about activities you're involved in. Volunteer things can be a slippery slope. Commitments, so on and so forth. One area that you would like to experiment with, slimming down, stopping some parts of it. Is anyone, you don't have to, is anyone willing to share theirs?
It's really hard. I would just like a few extra hours in a day. Can we do that instead?
It's tempting, isn't it?
Sarah, I need to skinny down on doing emails outside of what might be classed as normal work time. Because the first thing I do in the morning when I get up is get the iPhone off the side of the bed and see if anything's happened overnight. And then, I try and finish at sort of 6 o'clock-ish, but then I go and have dinner. Then, of course, the first thing I do before I turn the TV in or go do some sport or something is I check the emails again. So that's definitely one area I need to skinny down on big time.
I get, and it's good to see you as an aside. I totally hear you on that. And, email is particularly tough. It is a little like gambling because it triggers something called intermittent reinforcement, meaning maybe 6 of the emails are duds or you deal with them quickly. But every now and then you get one that has something kind of good or interesting or juicy. That wires right into our dopamine systems and makes it so tempting to always look down and do this. The problem, of course, besides starting your day in a very reactive mode, is that it also starts you with other people's priorities. I mean, for most people, and research shows this, neurologically, we are at our best in terms of most cognitive energy, space, creativity, problem solving, first thing in the morning, and yet we kind of blow it on, it's like junk food on email. Not to say you don't have to check your email soon in the morning, but if you're needing to really work on something with deep thinking, it's a shame to blow that time on email. Sam, let's go to our next one. So the other thing I'd have you think about related to our stop list and really getting zeroed in is to think a little bit about how stopping things by itself helps the quality of what you're doing in terms of the big important things. And I bet some of you, a lot of you know about lean manufacturing. I am not a consultant in lean, but I've worked alongside it at Alcoa, different healthcare systems, et cetera. And one of the really interesting mantras of it is taking waste out of the system. That if we want a great, flawless, high quality, safe system, we are constantly, and we're talking the line workers, not executives up in offices somewhere, looking for ways we can remove waste from the system without even changing the big blocks of how that's working. By pulling little pieces out, we make it better. And it's a great analogy for what we can think about with our lives. And the second reason is something called Parkinson's law. Parkinson's law refers to the fact that any kind of, we can use a meeting time as an example, any container, whatever we're trying to do in that will fill that space. So if the meeting is 90 minutes, the meeting will take 90 minutes to cover the content. If we say we're going to do it in 45, we do it in 45. But by expanding time, whatever we're doing just expands how long it takes. And I'm sure you've seen this. If you want a better meeting with people, often we shorten it. And I'm not talking about if you want to have some virtual happy hour, just chat time, but longer meetings often, especially when I hear executive teams talk about, oh, we had a 5-hour meeting. I just want to bang my head against the wall. I mean, from a neuropsychology standpoint, you were all probably fairly useless the last 3 hours. And I guarantee you didn't have deeper decision-making and crisp communication by the end. So we tend to fill any space we have. And I think it's important to think about that sometimes tightening up the constraints actually makes us stronger in what we're trying to get done. And then the other thing we can think about in removing the trivial is every day, really think consciously about something you're going to stop or lower the frequency. Whether we stop it now or stop how we're doing it or stop how frequently we're doing it, really to start bringing this into part of the conscious choice. Because even when requests come in, we often forget the choice around negotiating it. I get occasionally a client or a boss will say, I need this tomorrow. Okay. But very frequently, someone's asking us to do something and there is room to turn around and talk a little bit about when you need it, how you need it, if I need to do it. And just starting, even if you started by observing yourself with this, I think you'd find this really interesting, how much you're letting things in is primary. Let's go to our next one. I would love all of you to walk away thinking about choice also in terms of being able to stop things in the new year. The paradox of choice is something, there's an interesting book by a man named Barry Schwartz that elaborated on some research done, and this applies to employees or clients or anybody. Basically, in a nutshell, when there's too many choices, people don't choose. If there's too much, we tend to actually become less productive. And the primary research was done in a gourmet grocery store, and they put out samples, I'm making this up, of 25 jam types. And sure enough, more people than ever came and tried the jam, but they also tracked how many people bought the jam. And in another setting, on a different day, they put out 3 jam types. Fewer people tried them, but double the people actually purchased the jam. When there are too many choices, too many pieces coming towards us, it severely depresses our ability to be productive, show initiative, etc. We can ask ourselves, who's making the choice? You know, often if we just wrote in a rote way, go onto email, other people are directing how we're going to spend our first 2 hours versus plotting out, you know, I'm going to take an hour to get this done that takes deep time. Is it external or internal locus? of control. How am I being influenced? And then really paying attention, because this is wired into every human except sociopaths, which is no one on this call, that when someone asks or wants help, we are social pack animals. We have lived that way forever, and we want to help, and that's a good thing. But to have that pause before we take on something that's going to add to the list. Let's go to our next one. I alluded earlier to one of the main things if we practice a stop list is that we want to make sure Parkinson's law doesn't take over and the rest of our stuff doesn't just fill up the time. So we want to block in some time that's think time, that's deep work time. If you're a writer, writing time. If you're solving problems or learning something new. And a great example I liked was the CEO of LinkedIn was talking about when the company was taking off, he found himself getting up at 5:30 in the morning. It's an international company, and on calls until 10 at night, eating off and on calls, did not see his family. And he thought, why am I even running a company? This is ruining my life, basically. And so he had this radical idea that he needed time to be thinking strategically about the business and just couldn't do all of this. And so went a ways out in his calendar, blocked a couple of hours. He does 2 hours every day for thinking, for working, for problem solving. He blocked either end and time that he could move in the day. And he doesn't schedule over those. And he said, miraculously, the meetings I need to have, I'm figuring out ways to have. A lot of the stuff I was doing, I probably didn't need to be in there. And I feel like if the CEO of LinkedIn can do it, probably all of us could do a smaller version of it. And if it proves to be hard to say, well, it's hard to block out this time, leverage loss aversion. We need to think about what we are not doing, what we are not getting by blocking time for ourselves or family or exercise or faith or creativity or true work time, like not just doing the tactical stuff, because that we can use again loss aversion to say, I don't want to trade off that. But to make it more explicit, we need to really make choices to see it. Let's go to our next one, which is simple rules, and we're going to send these out. Not exhaustive, but things you can think about in helping you or helping your team. Understand that acquisition and subtraction are not equal. Trying to subtract things has a huge disparity. It does for you, for your team. This is part of why change management often fails. Things I'm used to and I like and I've gotten accustomed to are doubly hard to get rid of. I don't mean that about people, but to stop doing. Acknowledge the difficulty of saying no and really think about building a habit around some delay in there. While you evaluate, while you step back and ask yourself, what am I trading off? What am I trading off to take this on? Ruthlessly declutter, and this can be physically, this can be scheduled, this can be social obligations in normal times. I don't mean with good friends, but the obligation ones. Really think about identifying your 20% that drives 80% of results. And it can be an interesting exercise with a boss or peers to really get clear on that with everybody. Schedule in, even if you have to go 3 months out, those blocks of time that are most important for deep work, for learning, for time for you, whatever that thing is. And I feel like if all of us could get comfortable or more comfortable saying no, we would have a different workplace. We'd have different personal lives. So if it's easier to start small, start small. And you don't need to apologize endlessly. You can say, I'm afraid I can't do that. You don't have to go on and on. It can be fun to make a weekly removing ritual. We humans love rituals. So maybe you have a designated time that you look at your schedule or you think about how you're spending time. You may have heard one interesting writer said, if you want to understand someone's values, look at their calendar. You know, take some time to think about, how is this reflecting what's important to me and to others? Make sure you recognize progress for yourself. This client I told you about who didn't take on the Christmas project, which as an aside, she'd done every year in the past, really celebrated that, had special time with her family. And that's been a big thing. I mean, that she got over that hump and is continuing to be able to say no when she can't do things. And then share this with anyone else. It can be a fun practice with a team. I had one group, I was working with a finance group, and they were running all kinds of reports, and pretty sure nobody was looking at them because people would ask questions that they had just spent, 2 days. And so they ran a little experiment. We can't always do this, but they just stopped running the report. Not a single person asked about it. So it can be interesting to kind of say nothing's sacred cow. Let's make sure everything's valuable I'm doing. So,
Sarah, what do
Yeah.
you mean by that comment about look at somebody's calendar?
I mean with that, and we don't typically have everything in our calendar. If you looked at my calendar, you'd see working out every day, and that's not a badge of honor. I would be a crazy person without it. So clearly working out is important to me. That's a top value. If you look and see, wow, there's work hours and then at night there's more work, even though you have family at home, it's looking like a higher value is working. It doesn't mean you don't care about your family. If you look at someone's calendar and they take no vacations at all, then I have kind of an insight that maybe prioritizing some personal time or restore time is not as high value. If you look at their calendar and they are doing a lot of community service, you can see it. So it's one thing to say what is most important to us. It's a much more reliable predictor to see what people do.
Understood. Right. Okay. That explains it.
Yeah. So any questions, thoughts, feedback?
Very helpful and a great reminder
Good.
at the beginning of the year, just to set up some parameters and guardrails and things for yourself, and most importantly, stick with it.
Yep.
So great simple rules.
Good. I'm glad. Thanks, Takana.
Have you found that to be successful at some of this, you have to be kind of ruthlessly structured? That you live by the calendar, you have your 1 hour block for free thinking time. You don't, you don't have the email bleed over. Like, do you feel like rigidity is required to protect the time, or is that just
No,
some people
and
are too
Sam, would
many
you
edge?
mind flipping it back so we can see faces? No, I meant turning off the PowerPoint if you don't mind. I think the answer is kind of mixed, yes and no. So yes, in terms of, I think for us humans, there's such a pull towards, for instance, jumping in the email and getting sucked into your first 2 hours doing that. That it is helpful to set up some parameters whether it's other stuff comes first or I'm not going to get in. Some people need to set up concrete times they're in email, because truly it's interesting on studies, if we are toggling all day long, even as we're working, you're on the computer and dings and checking texts, it's as if your IQ goes down a standard deviation. So it's material. So I do think some guardrails like that is really helpful. I don't think you need to be rigid, like on every hour of every day, but developing a habit around particularly new things coming in. Is this something I should be putting my time into right now? Especially saying yes to commitments. And yes, the part I guess I'd also say on rigid is blocking some time. What I see, and everyone I work with, I'll talk about having some think time or having some strategic time or deep work time. And the biggest thing I hear is, well, other people needed me. Okay, well, first of all, if we can't be away from our team for 2 hours, there's probably a bigger issue. I mean, if something was on fire, they can find a way to reach you. It just shows how tough that pull is, both with how channeled we are to constantly be on. And I think some people get a little anxious having deep time that I'm really working. But the biggest challenge may be us in making that shift. So I would set some rules around morning, anything that bleeds into personal time that you've deemed in your 20% of most important. I would set some rules for yourself. And starting the day is particularly important. And any work time you're setting, I would also be rigid around that. Any other questions?
This is more of a comment than a question, but I do feel like the pandemic sort of uniquely positions us to do this, because in terms of like social engagements, all of a sudden everything was on the stop list for me. And now I feel like I'm in a better position to argue things back in versus yes. So while it's been a really challenging time, and that way it's been a really life-giving time in terms of stopping things.
I think that's a great point. And I guess my biggest wish is that people don't just do the fill it back up. I mean, so much of what we do is unconscious and autopilot. And it would be very easy to just get it back to how it was. There's some comfort in that. But I do hope for us that we can make decisions about that. Some things have been okay that they've gone out. I don't know about you. I feel that way. Well, thank you so much for joining. Carol, it's good to see your face too. I'm seeing some old friends, which is fun. John, good to see you. And I hope if anyone has questions, please feel free to shoot an email afterwards. We'd be happy to chat about those. Thank you so much for joining.